On the 27th of March, your government took the decision to expel a Russian diplomat in what could only be described as an act of sycophantic fawning over your British counterparts. You asked us to trust British intelligence, the very same intelligence agencies that provided us with false information regarding Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, the same service that refuses to this day to release information on the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. 3 days after you took that decision, 750 innocent Palestinian protesters were wounded by Israeli soldiers at a peaceful planned march in Gaza. 15 civilians were murdered that day. Over the 2 weeks which followed, that death toll reached 31 civilians, with over 1,000 injured. Not one Israeli diplomat has been expelled. This was a predetermined, careful attack which included sniper gunfire, drones, artillery and tear gas attacks on peaceful protesters. One of those innocent Palestinians was a journalist, and since his murder, a video has been leaked to the press revealing Israeli soldiers cheering and celebrating as they used Palestinian protesters as sniper practice. Have you seen the video, Minister? It's truly grotesque. On the 28th of March, I received a letter which highlighted the regular arrest and detention of Palestinian political representatives, concentrating lately on the Palestinian Legislative Council. Right now, there are 12 members of the PLC held in Israeli prisons, 9 under internment without trial. Not content with arresting Palestinian parliamentarians, the Israeli government also wanted to prevent the Lord Mayor of Dublin from entering occupied Palestine. Did you consider, Minister, summoning the Israeli ambassador to explain their hostility to our elected Lord Mayor? As you know, Israel operates an apartheid state in occupied Palestine, where it's illegal for Palestinians to be a member of any political party. It's fine for Israeli citizens to be members of political parties. They have access to civilian courts, but it's illegal for Palestinians who are dealt with by military courts. But I'm sure you already know this, Minister. That's how apartheid works. That's why there are 400 Palestinian children languishing in Israeli jails right now. That's why Israel is in contravention of its commitments under the 4th Geneva Convention, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Covenants, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, the Convention Against Torture, and the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Minister, unlike Russia, we do have proof of Israel's crimes. The proof is the dead bodies being buried each week in Gaza, the leaked videos online of unarmed protesters being shot while they pray, the children in prison sentenced to 10 years for throwing stones, the political representatives incarcerated in Israeli jails for simply representing the Palestinian people. Isn't it time, Minister, that our government really stood up for human rights? Not just words. Isn't it beyond time that you personally took a stand against apartheid and expelled the Israeli ambassador? I don't know what more evidence you need to take decisive action to expel the Israeli ambassador, Minister. Your track record on Russia would suggest you don't need any evidence, just a nod and a wink from Boris Johnson.
Thank you. Minister to respond.
Thank you, Cahirlock. If I might say, not exactly a balanced view in relation to Irish-British relations, coming from Sinn Féin, not for the first time. But in relation to the issue of substance that you raised, Deputy, or Senator, I've made 2 statements on behalf of the Government on the 31st of March and on the 9th of April on the recent violence on the Israeli-Gaza border. I called on all parties to show restraint, in particular on the use of force by Israel against the demonstrators. Any country is entitled to defend its borders, but the use of force must be proportionate to any immediate threat. The number of people injured by live ammunition has been very troubling, and I support the calls by the EU and by the UN Secretary-General for an independent and transparent investigation into these events. Events and images such as we've seen in recent weeks from Gaza are of great concern to many people, including myself. I understand that there are very strong feelings that something must be done, and I agree with those feelings. The situation in Gaza is unsustainable. I was there a couple of months ago, and I've been to Gaza on more than one occasion, and I know the tension on the Israeli-Gaza border and I've witnessed it and spoken to people on that border. But the issue here is, how do we change all that? The issue is, how does Ireland influence and understand the perspective of Palestinians and Israelis with a view to trying to see a political solution which ultimately is the only way in which Palestinians living in Gaza will find some hope for the future and will allow them to turn away from demonstration and violence and frustration and tension because of the circumstances that they currently find themselves in and the conditions that they're currently living in within Gaza, which are totally unacceptable. Every time I go to Gaza or meet people from there, they are educated people who understand exactly what's going on in the world. And because of that, the depth of their frustration in terms of the restrictions that they live under in Gaza are unbearable. That being said, what we need to focus on as politicians and as governments, in my view, is to look at ways in which we can change that, rather than simply gestures and actions of protest. We should be finding a way to ensure that we contribute to political dialogue that brings about change. And that is what I'm about. And the idea that by expelling an Israeli ambassador and therefore shutting an Israeli embassy in Dublin actually helps the efforts to find political solutions to problems that have been going on for decades, in my view, simply doesn't stack up. In diplomatic language, expelling an ambassador essentially means that you're no longer interested in dialogue. And certainly that is not the approach of this government, and it's not my approach either. And with respect, Senator, to take that approach, in my view, would do nothing except offer a gesture of solidarity to Palestinians in the short term, but actually then be unable to help them in the medium term, which is what I would like to do in our quest for a two-state solution that is fair to both Israelis and Palestinians. So I intend to continue to talk to an Israeli government, to continue to talk to the Israeli ambassador here in Dublin, as I've done in relation to these issues, and also to continue to talk to the Palestinian representative and ambassador here in Dublin, as indeed I will continue to talk to Palestinian political leaders as well, as I have been doing on numerous occasions since becoming Minister for Foreign Affairs. So what I'm interested in is political solutions for very, very difficult problems that result in violence, in discrimination and in totally unacceptable conditions within the occupied territories that Palestinians find themselves living in today. But I'm afraid the suggestions and the approach that you are supporting, Senator, will take Ireland's efforts in terms of changing that backwards rather than forwards.
Thank you. Briefly, Senator.
Look, thank you for your response, Minister. I'm disappointed. I'm sure you won't be surprised at that. You talk about gestures and actions of protest. Unfortunately, what you've done to date amounts to just that. It's words. And words are an empty vessel at this point in time. This is an apartheid state we're dealing with, and I can't help, unfortunately I'm a little bit older than you, remembering the same attitudes being spoken about South Africa in the 1980s by members of your party, saying that we needed to keep lines of dialogue open, that we shouldn't take action against this. And it was the Dunstore strikers that helped change that situation. And now we all agree that sanctions worked against the apartheid regime in South Africa. That is the road we need to go on. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of the Palestinian people themselves. That's what they're asking for. The time for empty gestures, the time for empty words, unfortunately, is long gone. You were in this chamber a few months ago talking about a potential peace process. There isn't one. There isn't a potential peace process. There's just more slaughter on the streets of Gaza and throughout Palestine. When will you recognise, Minister, that Israel is an apartheid state? When will you recognise that fact and act accordingly?
So if you want to add anything to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, first of all, the Senator clearly hasn't a clue what I'm doing, because the only time he ever talks to me about this issue is when motions like this are put down, unlike many others who have a deep interest. Well, sorry, that's what's coming towards me from you. With respect, Deputy, you say that I'm doing nothing, but you have actually no idea what I'm doing.
Well, tell us.
The only.
Tell us what you're doing, Minister.
Please. The Minister has already outlined his reply.
I'm responding to your suggestion, Deputy, that we actually advance Israeli-Palestinian relations, the ability to find a way towards a negotiated solution by expelling an Israeli ambassador from Dublin. I think that would be counterproductive. In fact, I know it would be. That does not mean that we should not speak up and be critical of Israel's actions. I do that all the time, and I speak directly to Israeli representatives and to my counterparts in that regard. But your approach is simply to shut off Israel, not to talk to them, and simply take a one-sided view of this issue. That will not deliver an outcome that is actually lasting, that is peaceful, and that makes sense for Palestinians in the medium term. And that's why I totally reject it.
Thank you.